So we started as White Ops 10 years ago, really as a small group of mostly hackers in a follow the money exercise. And a part of that was addressing how money is spent in digital advertising and how fraud can exploit that. We've certainly come a long way in the last 10 years as an industry and as an ecosystem where there is a set of standards and policies in place now that wasn't there before. It's greatly improved over where we started, but fraud is a moving, evolving landscape, and the first fundamental of fraud is follow the money. And so what we see is more exploitation in emerging environments like CTV, like gaming, like audio, and especially where the CPMs tend to be higher.
So let's talk about CTV for a moment. Who are the bad players? How do they play? How pervasive it is? Are they sort of getting into the fringe sites, main sites? What's going on in CTV and fraud?
Yeah, it's a fascinating landscape. And if we kind of zoom back out a little bit, this is a game of attackers and defenders. And the game here is always to look like a million humans, right? That's what's valuable. We have over $400 billion spent in digital advertising to reach human eyeballs. The real question is how many human eyeballs on the internet and how do you impersonate that? In CTV, if we go back to the fundamentals of fraud, right? The first one is always follow the money. And attackers like to exploit areas where the dollars are high and the visibility is lower, and that's kind of one of the byproducts of any emerging area. We saw the same thing in mobile. We're seeing the same thing in gaming and audio and out of home, where we don't have full instrumentation or standards yet. And so the most prolific type of fraud right now in advertising is CTV impersonation, right? And this is very interesting because it's not actually CTV devices, it's millions of devices pretending to be CTV. We just last year uncovered one of the largest operations in CTV called Pareto. It was 1 million Android phones impersonating over 6,000 CTV apps, generating over 500 million bid requests per day. Now, the byproduct of that to all of us is it looked like millions of people watching TV in the bid stream, when really it was a population of Android devices that were impersonating CTV devices.
So what challenges does this present to the industry? How is it being fixed? How are you attacking it? What's the kind of the collaboration, if there is, between the buy and the sell side, and kind of what you guys are doing?
Sure, yeah, there's a lot there, and underpinning all of this is the fact that fraud is an economic game, right? It's really about the cost of the attacker and the cost of the defenders, all of us in the ecosystem. And that's where the real game is played out. The state of that is that it is much cheaper to attempt to do fraud than it is to defend against it, and we have to attack that level first. And a part of that is collective protection. Our goal as human security is to make fraud unprofitable in advertising, and that is something that we've worked on for the last 10 years to great extent. And a part of that is collective protection, disruptions, standards. All of that is work that we're still doing in connected TV.
When you say takedown, what does that mean?
Sure, yeah. So another important part of this problem is that fraud is a security problem. It's not a measurement problem. It's not like brand safety or viewability. There is a set of sometimes sophisticated actors on the other side that are well-equipped and well-resourced that are adapting, right? And so it requires a security-centric approach. A part of that is not stopping at detection and reporting or even blocking, but going beyond that to investigate, get the intelligence, and actually in some cases do a disruption or a takedown of a large-scale attacker, infrastructure, or group. We've been doing this for 10 years, and in some cases they're large-scale in collaboration with law enforcement. Going back to Eve a few years ago, where it was one of the largest ad fraud scams in history. ultimately culminated in the indictment and extradition of Russian cyber criminals that are now behind bars and have felony charges. In the middle of all of that was 30 companies that we pulled together in the ad tech ecosystem and 6 governments to support law enforcement in the takedown. Last year, this Pareto example, it wasn't the right opportunity to work with law enforcement, but we organized a private sector disruption. And so Human, Google, Roku, Trade Desk, Magnite, Omnicom, all partnered together to pull together the pieces of how the fraud was working and then enact a takedown of the applications and the infrastructure and the command and control behind it, so that we're not just blocking it and letting them retool and come back, but we're actually taking measures to respond to make the cost of fraud higher.
And Tamer, tell us, a little about the company, about your growth trajectory, opportunities, what the roadmap is.
Sure. Yeah, we have a set of business units that are focused, one on ad tech and advertising, and then in enterprise security. And so we have a large e-commerce footprint. We have now a growing publisher footprint in our media security business. A lot of the tier 1 and tier 2 ad tech platforms run our technology and capabilities. All of that feeds into one common platform of visibility and signal on how fraud and bad actors are operating. But we just completed a merger of one of our largest competitors in the enterprise security space that's bringing in new technology that will bring to the publisher ecosystem and the marketer ecosystem to start to work across the full supply chain.
And finally, to the industry, what would you say in terms of the state of fraud? Is it good, bad, ugly? Where is it going? How do you see? What's your outlook now and perhaps for the year ahead?
Sure. We've definitely made progress, but there are some really important fundamentals. First of all, vigilance and standards are critical. And we've had good evolution of education and awareness on this problem over the last 10 years. And there are entire levels of fraud that start to decrease when you start to have vigilance and you start to set standards and you start to make it a priority. That continues to be really important. What's missing there is a compliance solution. It's, any mature market, when there is a set of commonly adopted standards, we have a way to measure how much of those standards are implemented. So there's still some work to do in ensuring standards are implemented and complied with. But vigilance and awareness is number one. The second takeaway is that fraud is always an evolution, and it requires a security-centric approach. At any time that we have high-value dollars flowing through a system, there's going to be innovation and continuous evolution of ways to exploit that. And we have to have a security mindset around it. And lastly, collective protection is one of the only ways to address this on the economic level. We really decrease the levels of fraud. We need to enable collective visibility and protection against fraud. We need to do disruptions and share intelligence going beyond just blocking fraud, but actually changing the cost of it. And that's an important part of solving the problem.